I guess before we start talking, I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming along. It really is the late hour of the day, and I know people have been here since 9 o'clock this morning, so thank you so much for coming along. What I'd like to do really quickly before we kind of open up, I'd like it to be really informal, by the way. I don't really want to kind of, do you know what I mean, it is tired eyes and let's have a conversation. What I'd like to do first of all, because the context of Chile is very well known to some people, but is very unknown to others. So I'd just like to give about 2 to 3 minutes on Chile as a country, their economic, their political kind of background. I'm trying to condense a 6,000 word paper into about 40 seconds here for you, so please be patient. So 1970, Chile, Unidad Popular are elected, Salvador Allende, the country's first democratically elected Marxist. Renationalised corporations, wanted to give workers a higher wage, made it its sole aim of reducing poverty levels and reducing inequality in Chile. That wasn't welcomed by all, nor by the United States administration, who withdrew financial support, also with the International Monetary Fund at the time. So on the 11th of September, not 2001, but 1973, fighter jets bombed La Moneda Palace, led in a coup by Augusto Pinochet, which then led to 17 years of a dictatorship, to the 3,000 disappearances, and over potentially 400,000 people leaving in political exile. But what I'd like to talk about more importantly is, as well as dropping bombs, they were dropping an ideology in Chile, which became, and it still is to this day, fundamental to every pore and little nook and cranny of that society, and that ideology is neoliberalism. I'm sure we've heard it many, many times over the last 24 hours, but if we want to know kind of where the experimentations may have come from, Chile is a good starting point in some respects. So from 1957 to 1970, over 100 Chilean economists went to study at the University of Chicago, where Milton Friedman was practicing economic liberalism at the time. And once they arrived back in Chile, there was quite a concerted project to allow that economic thinking to become installed in Chilean society. So once Pinochet and the army took over, the military knew kind of fuck all about economics, but the 100 Chicago boys knew. So they presented something called the Brick, which was a book about this thick, apparently, about 600 pages wide, and took it to the military and said, this is the economic strategy. This is what will help restore wealth and create the kind of Chile which we've known prior to Salvador Allende. So, as it was called, the Chilean miracle, 1992, Milton Friedman would state that Chile is by all odds the best economic success story of Latin America today. However, it wasn't. It encountered 2 severe recessions, 1975 and 1982, witnessed a 16.6% fall in Chile's GNP, and several industries were lost. Unemployment rose to 18.1% compared to the high of 4.7% under Salvador Allende. But most importantly is the Constitution of Liberty, quite ironically titled in 1980, where Pinochet and several of the kind of Chicago boys, and who believed that neoliberalism was the way forward for Chilean society, they decided to enshrine those ideals into the Constitution, which became known as the Constitution of Liberty, that still exists in Chile today. This current contemporary debate about whether there will be change, however people have very little faith within government strategy there. So that era, as Naomi Klein would say, said if you were outside the wealth bubble at the time in Chile, the miracle looked like the Great Depression for those struggling. So we moved to redemocratization in 1990. The plebiscite, 55% voted to get rid of Pinochet, whilst 45% still voted to keep him, just to keep that. People did like Pinochet, and people still do support Pinochet in Chile to this day. However, the constitution had been written. If you were left, if you were right, if you were a communist, or if you were an avid Pinochet supporter, neoliberalism is the consensus in Chile. You see it strong, you might see it in the UK about the higher education dispute more than the student protests, where approximately 60% of higher education is completely privatised. Chile has one of the lowest voter turnouts in the OECD, with a 49% turnout in 2013 compared to 68% average of OECD. So why is this radical within that context? Why is Colectivo Sustento radical? I am not a member of Colectivo Sustento. I'm kind of a long-term collaborator for the last 7 years. So I'd just like to kind of go through what I would say is probably the 3 most important parts, what makes their work radical, and what makes the collaboration radical with people like myself, Nikki and Mary. First of all, I would say it's the continuity of the practice. They first entered Chilean 1 prison in 1994 and still work there to this day. Not on a project-by-project basis, but by a sole core group of prisoners who would work day in, day out on the work. That's what they would do, that was their kind of livelihood, that's what would get them through their prison sentence. Some of those guys would work with a group 8 to 10 years, which is phenomenal by any kind of participant retention rate. So what's happened recently, as you can tell, is that instead of saying, okay, when we leave the prison, that's the end, once you leave prison, you come and join us. You come along and become part of our collective. And what they're doing now is that people who are leaving prison now are being trained as facilitators and educators and go and deliver theatre workshops in youth offender institutions. And it's nothing of that would have been possible. So we talk about change a lot. Change has been thrown around a lot over the last 2 days. But continuity, I think, is quite key to that practice. We couldn't turn around and reject a complete economic and political system in a 6-week project or even a 12-week project at best. It takes years and years and years. I think Chile is a fine example, certainly the work of Colectivo Sustento, about a continued resistance and the effects that you can get out of that. And there are struggles. It's not some kind of utopian dream in the back garden of a Santiago house. There are troubles. So the second thing I'd like to talk about is the autonomy. Chile has an arts council called Fondart. However, community theatre isn't recognised in Chile, although during the Allende years, with folk singers such as Victor Jara and the popular song movement at the time, community theatre was everywhere. However, the military made sure they removed it. So at the moment there's a kind of a process of reclaiming history in Chile, reclaiming the community theatre movement. Although it's quite interesting to see that some of the major universities in Santiago are creating a very commercialised form of it at the moment. So it's kind of an interesting ongoing battle. So instead of saying, oh no, we didn't get the funding, that's the end of the project, let's all go home, they said, no, we'll build a garden, as you've seen. They kind of said, we will find other ways. I like to think of the autonomy and the autonomous nature of the work as this idea that instead of saying we believe in the philosophy of our autonomy, we are doing the autonomy. There is practical elements, there are practical ways around it. And I think, as Penny was kind of saying, is that if we can't do one thing, we will certainly find another way of doing that. And obviously, continuity, autonomy and collaboration are all kind of linked in together. So, and the last would be collaboration. So I went in 2009 for my first time. I didn't even know where Chile was. I didn't even know who Pinochet was. I didn't have a clue, to be honest with you. They came and did a presentation here, and I was very interested in prison theatre at the time. And I went and I learnt a lot. So we had a conversation, said, this is very exciting, how do we continue it? So I said I could do this, I don't know, I could go cycling to raise some money, or I could apply to such bizarre funds as the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. Yeah, I know.
Did you get any money?
Yeah, I got the money. We went, and I went and did that, and that's how that collaboration is, by being a bit clever and looking at the way, instead of saying, no, sorry, I can't come, saying, okay, I will come, how do we make it happen? And I think that's the way that collaboration is based. So theoretically, underneath all of that, I would like to say it was, for myself and for Penny, is probably heavily influenced by the kind of the core theoretical underpinning of the work of Paulo Freire. It has to be based on critical reflection at all times. There is a dialogue. There is no, I am from the global north, you are from the global south. There'll be some form of paternalism. It is solely based on mutual learning. How do we continue? As John Holloway might say, and certainly Chile would look like, how do we continue to make our crack in this system? A system in Chile which is overbearing completely. From your water to your pension to your student loans, everything is currently, I know I sometimes get told off for blaming everything on neoliberalism, but I kind of think in the context of Chile it certainly has a very, very big role to play at the moment. So what I would like to finish on is that what I've learned most from that work is that it's not necessarily what happens on the stage, it's what happens off the stage. Not in terms of the personal development, but in terms of the continued struggle. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to finish with a short monologue which the tour which Colectivo Sustento took around was called Maracate, which used mental health as a metaphor for social control. It's quite ironic that they were allowed to perform this in the prison where they actively killed off a prison officer, which was quite radical. Just as a kind of paradox, just a really quick anecdote, is that in Chile the prisons are still run by the military. You go and you have your nice big knee-high boots, and the top guards have swords, which is hilarious. I don't know if people are they'll never use them apparently, but it's just a very bizarre kind of context, incredibly militarized. However, once the classroom door closes, I'm sure Nikki and Mary will talk about this, it is what they would call a circle of freedom. It is the radical opportunity. And at the same time, the guys will go out and perform at international festivals where they're taken by handcuffs and armed guard, and then they'll go and perform radical political gestures in front of 2,000, 3,000 people. And then they'll be handcuffed and taken back to the prison. It is the most bizarrest paradox I have ever seen in any kind of... I still can't get they can't get their head around it, really. It's very strange that something so authoritarian enables this quite incredible political radicalism, which is some. If anyone has any other experience of that happening, please tell me, because I've never come across it. But I'd like to finish with this short monologue. So it's the end of the show, and there's a character who hasn't talked for 45, 50 minutes. And he comes forward, everybody else has left the stage, and he addresses the audience. He says, "I stopped talking because I had too much pain in my throat. But who cares about that? Who cares what a person like me thinks? What one of us thinks? Who really cares? No one cares. I could take advantage of this moment to say important things. I could talk about world injustice, my people's pain, but why say so many things if no one is listening? And if they listen, they don't care. I'm not intelligent, I'm not a good person, I have nothing. But I know what's going to happen. This is going to end, and we won't see each other again. And everything will go back to normal. You will go back home, you will sleep, which I think you all might need at this moment in time. And tomorrow you won't remember anything. And I'll still have this huge pain here in my throat. Everything that has been said, did anybody hear it? Will anybody be different after this? What happens after the lights go out and the applause dies down will depend on you. So that when someone speaks, someone also listens, really listens." Thank you very much.
Does anybody just want to ask any questions, and then we can add?
We'll try and answer the best to our abilities. We don't know the in and everyday workings of the collective, or if anyone wants to ask about the collaboration or anything, just throw them out there and see what we can do.
You talked about, sorry.
It's all right. It's not. You don't need that now.
Talked, I think both mentioned maybe about the interest in bringing back that work, and I see it as it's kind of unique in what you're talking about as an opportunity. Does any of it transfer? Is anything of it bringable, backable to context here, for example?
It's a fantastic question. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think the big thing is this idea that you can create a theatre company and a garden project and all of it, because it all happens in Penny's home. And so for me, it really makes me think about this idea of doing the work that is completely, there's no boundaries between work and play. Like for her, it's completely about a way of life. And so I suppose that there's those little nuggets that you take back of like how you approach what it is that you do. But obviously there's an element of freedom because there isn't the same rules and regulations that you have here. So you wouldn't. It would be a lot harder to do something like that in your house. So
Or in a prison.
yeah.
Or in prison. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Just really, do you want to say anything? No. I think there's just two things. Is first of all the context, because part of the Winston Churchill Trust thing was to go and learn something and bring it back. That was and I went and saw something that was potentially contextually not possible in regards to some of the kind of ideas. I can have a garden in my house any time, but could I create a wage for myself off selling certain things? There was kind of these issues that I first kind of encountered. But I remember when Penny told me an anecdote once. She said when they first went to the prison and the prison funding ended for that 8-week or whatever it was project, they sat in the room with the guys and said, "What do you want to do?" And they said, "We've loved this. We really want to carry on doing it." And they said, "Okay, well, we'll make a commitment if you make a commitment. We'll come every Friday if you come every Friday. Pay, no pay, whatever, we'll just come." And they said yes, and they've gone every day since. Which then kind of lightens, which someone talked about very briefly, it brings up a question about financial issue. As theatre workers in the UK, would I turn up and work for free? I guess it depends who I'm working for and what is the purpose of my work. Does that make sense? So kind of, there was this personal, very personal kind of my own struggle, my own kind of I'll go and do that, regardless of. And there's also a very kind of cultural thing there. So for example, they put everything out in the front garden and everyone comes and they dig up the garden in the front street and they put everything in, you know, kind of stuff which, you know, if you kind of put up a fence next to your neighbour in some places in the UK, you might have a lawsuit of some sort, do you know what I mean? I think it's very interesting things. So some things have, I think much more, maybe at this moment, it's an ideology, it's an idea, I think, that's being transferred. I'm still trying to find ways.
I mean, and the other big thing for me is that they create theatre. It's not prisoners playing prisoners on stage. So they look beyond the prison walls, and so that's something, because there's so many projects that I've done where it's, for example, you go into prison and you do victims awareness, and you do stuff that's continuously about making them better human beings. And so what I think to me is, you know, it's humanising the work that I was seeing there. And so not just about in the context of prison, but it's just in general in terms of approaches. I think is really interesting, because I see that a lot with all different, you know, homeless people playing homeless people on stage. So yeah, so it's made me reflect on that a lot.
I think just going on the point of like the idea that something is maybe a bit risky to do in England, I think it's a good thing to kind of, it's like for the work that we do, we have to, if we get funding for example, then we have to adhere by certain boxes, certain criteria. But I think there is so much freedom in just saying like fuck it and just doing something anyway, and I think that risk needs to be taken. Even though people do need wages, they do need to live obviously. I think it's just having the courage to say actually I'm just going to give it a go, like plant stuff in my garden, see what happens. It's just taking that first step. That's what I got from it, and we just have a bit more guts about it, I guess.
Yeah, and they sustain themselves in different ways. Obviously they've got the garden project, and I mean, one of the big reasons of wanting to make this film was to be able to show it to people to get international collaborations, because that's really important. So that was part of the focus of wanting to make that film.
Okay. Do we have a question? Yeah, did it go up and go down again?
I did go up and down, yeah. It was a question about how the project as a whole, so the work in prisons and the work in the garden in Penny's house, kind of maps onto a physical context, physical environment. So just, and maybe it was explained at the beginning, I'm afraid I missed the first few minutes.
Yeah, I apologise about that. People got confused between the 10 o'clocks and the 4
it's totally fine. But just the relationship between prison and where that gardening work is happening, and then the relationship between the social and practical work in the garden and wherever that garden is situated. Do you see what I mean? Just kind of mapping it out a wee bit.
Yeah, I guess the relationship between the prison and the garden, I guess, is that?
Yeah, I guess in space, how far apart are they?
Oh, how far apart? Okay,
Yeah,
So Cleaner is an area on the outskirts of Santiago. It's about a 45-minute bus journey. So Penny lives in San Miguel and Santiago, which is just just
Yeah.
outside of the centre.
But once you've got on the metro, and it can take, you need like 2 hours to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, and then once they've arrived at the garden and the work seems to be focused there, does it have a relationship that it extends beyond that area as well?
In terms of,
There was that other group that was coming in and working with them too. Does it extend
Yeah.
beyond
Yeah, yeah.
that? Is there further?
do you want to talk a bit more about that? 'Cause that was,
Well, do you mean in terms of the garden or the theatre groups? I mean, there's different things that happen outside. I know they did used to have a theatre group that met weekly, but I think one of the things is difficult to sustain the theatre group, and that was one of the ways that it could be sustained, which was, say, some of the ex-prisoners would continue. When we were there was one guy who was staying overnight in the prison every night, but he would come every day during the day, and he would sleep there at the weekend. So Penny, you know, the level of trust to me was quite incredible. And so there's that participation. Yeah, then there's other collective groups that they work with where they have kind of an exchange and barter system where they work and collaborate together. And there's also a new project they're doing in juvenile.
Yeah.
Aren't they? Yeah. Does that kind of, and the garden is in her home, which she has.
yeah, it's a Chilean term called autogestión, which is kind of self-sustainability, that bartering system. You know, it's quite a common. It's not just a. I think it's quite common in Chilean society. You know, if you come and dig in my garden, I'll feed you for the day, or and stuff like that. So it's quite a nice way of working, really, and it kind of brings this whole community about it. I guess just I'd like to, you know, you talked about geographical. I'd like to come more about the theoretical kind of relationship between the garden and the prison. There's a fantastic Krishnamurti quote which kind of says it's no sign of it's no sign of well-being to be adjusted, to be profoundly adjusted, to be adjusted to a profoundly sick society, which I think is a kind of really nice way of looking at the work. You know, like Nick, you were just saying about the kind of cognitive behavioural therapy approach here in some of the prison theatre work and all the rest of it. They would argue, why would I be wanted to rehabilitate to a society that is, they would say, is profoundly sick or is profoundly built on kind of rotten kind of ideas. And I think there's this idea that the society they want to create starts in the prison, which sounds like a paradoxical situation because they're completely excluded, although one may argue that a prison is a vital institution within societal structure. But it is constantly about this envisioning of a utopia, thinking about utopias, thinking about new ideas, holistically, not just within the theatre workshop, but within the garden and stuff like that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Have any more questions? Should we do 2 more, and then we'll, as if there is 2 more. It's a big ask, you know, at kind of 20 to 11.
How do you feel the experiences influence your practice as practitioners? If it has.
I mean, I think mine is actually what I said before, which is about this focus on the people and the theatre and the art form over the issue and the people that you're working with.
Yeah.
I mean, there's many things I could probably reflect on. But I mean, I would just, you know, there's a vision for me of, it's just the whole thing with growing, it's kind of made me rethink what I see as community theatre. I know that Penny was saying outside her house that there's a bit outside her house where it just says take what you want. And for her it's just saying, you know, when people come, they take it and they think and they reflect, and she says that starts a conversation in the community, and that to her is what community theatre is. So, yeah.
And I think for me, well, that was the first time that I'd worked in a prison environment, so that was a massive kind of, I don't know what it was. It was just an amazing experience, and I don't think there's anything like that. But again, as Nikki said, like just the idea of starting with theatre. So if I ever was, I mean, since then I've been living in Spain, so I've actually lived back in the UK a couple of months. But going back into that work, and if I do want to kind of pursue that work, that is something that I'm probably going to kind of cherish. That starting with theatre, not thinking about the people, who they are, where they are in that sense, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense.
Alright, just check, it's a bit tight.
Yeah, I think just really quickly, and we'll go to our last question. Then I'll ask the question. Should we all go to the bar? And everyone will say yes. I think for me is the politicisation of, because there could easily be an argument, which is talked about in the little paper, that community theatre practice, applied theatre practice, whatever you would like to call it, has been depoliticised from, there's a fantastic quote. I feel like I'm giving you my provocation. I'm doing a provocation tomorrow at 12 o'clock. I'm doing it for you now. Kind of. There's a fantastic quote by Elizabeth Lennon, who was one of the co-founders of 784, and she kind of says, it's written in 1990, it really sums up probably the feeling about that time, that there has been this crisis in the political left, you know, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and communism is kind of, the great opposition has come to an end, you know, capitalism has triumphed, and she kind of maps it into how it started to affect the way we create our art, how we work with our communities, that theatre is no longer oppositional, but has become this individualistic competition funding nightmare, and we no longer want to get on the pitch to get involved in the game anymore. We create the barriers to stop us getting involved in the action. There's this beautiful kind of quote. I think me and Penny had this conversation. She would talk about her experiences in Australia in the 70s, and we kind of said, the theatre we make nothing is devoid of context. Nothing is devoid of ideology. Everything is a product of something. And if we're creating theatre that wants to create change, we have to know what we're changing it, why we're changing, and also what is our idea for changing, instead of this neutrality almost at all times. Not saying I'm claiming let's brainwash everybody we work with, but what is our political ideology, and what political ideology are we fighting? I think that's really what I've taken from the work with Penny. It's really started that conversation. And last, but certainly not least.
I think I was just thinking about, I guess I was curious about what it does for the men in the prisons after they leave, because so much of prison-based work there seems to be, its effect seems to be measured in kind of reoffending rates and those kind of things, which is quite odd when work's happening on a project-by-project basis, and people are often coming out quite, the same circumstances that got them in there in the first place. And so there's something really interesting about a project where over 8 to 10 years, it sounds like incredible trust is built up if they're going to sleep in their house and those kind of things. And then there's something for them to go on to. And I was just wondering, do you know what happens for people afterwards?
I think
it's quite a big question.
No, it's incredibly complex. It's on a very much individual basis. Because as well as kind of living without being in society, majority have families, and there's also visits are a lot more liberal in Chile, so families can arrive with the 4 children and take the food in. I remember the first time I went to prison, we had a barbecue. It was the most surrealist experience. We actually bought the meat and had the barbecue. It was fantastic. So they kind of maintain this very strong relationship with their families, but at the same time it causes quite a lot of struggle because the relationship becomes institutionalised almost. And that started to happen for quite a few of the guys who came out, and they started doing the work. However, they would be struggling to maintain re-establishing their family life, as well as having to find financial income, as the work cannot solely provide, which is always the struggle. But if we are going to welcome someone, how do we make sure it's comfortable and not a hindrance really, but help to their, I don't want to say rehabilitation, not all that, their continued kind of struggle. So, yeah, that's what I'd say. It's hard, it's difficult, it's really, really difficult, yeah.
I mean, I recommend, looking at their website, and you can always get in touch with the collective and going and visiting them.
Yeah,
amazing. So.
Absolutely. It is, it's incredibly complex. Do you know what I mean? Pepe, who you saw there at the end, he now goes out and delivers these workshops. It's an amazing kind of thing to see. He goes, and that's part of my PhD research. I'll be going in November through to January for 3 months to document how that has worked. So maybe next year we can have that conversation and I can really answer it for you properly. I'm going to end there because it is really... Oh, quickly.
Sorry.
No, please.
Is the film available
Yes,
online?
it's on YouTube. It's called Sharing the Collective. Please, if you want to have a chat with me, I'll be going down for a Guinness. Please come and have a chat. If you want any of the contact details for Penny or the collective, please come speak to me. It's, as Penny would like to say, it's the start of the dialogue. Yeah? Thank you so much for coming so late. Thank you. Hello, Penny, who's going to be seeing this tomorrow.
So-
Yeah.